The secret to true lazy gardening is actually the exact opposite of what you see me standing on right here. Lazy gardening works when the soil is never disrupted or uncovered. What do you see right now? The sun is baking down on it, the moisture is evaporating from the surface, it's getting hard, compacted, and increasingly useless. As lazy gardeners, we have a few tricks up our sleeves to turn that kind of desert wasteland into a fertile growing paradise that needs very little maintenance, money, or time. No weeding, no watering, no crop rotation, no chemical fertilizers or pest repellents or anything else, just low input, easy, lazy gardening. And that is what this video is all about. I am preparing my garden beds for my spring planting, which involves raking last year's garden pathways into the garden beds around them, which does a handful of great things for us as lazy gardeners. First, every year, my garden beds get a little bit taller, which means that I have to bend over a little bit less every single year, which as I get older becomes a more and more enticing reality. Then we lay down fresh cardboard in the middle of the pathways. That massively helps with water retention. It helps to break down whatever's beneath it. It encourages a whole bunch of microbial growth and other good stuff. And if you're one of the many commenters on my last video about why we use cardboard in the garden, feel free to look up the science about the plants that actually uptake PFAs and then go right out into your garden and put some cardboard down. After the cardboard is laid in the pathways, we cover the cardboard with a new layer of wood mulch. And these are not the wood chips that we pay $15 a bag to get at our local home center either. These are free wood chips that I get from my local arborists. You can sign up for your own free wood chips from chipdrop.com, or you can start calling the power companies like I do and say, hey look, I've got a spot, you can drop these chips for free, save yourself a $35 dumping fee, and give me all the chips all the time. So when it rains really hard here, which it often does, the wood chips not only help to mitigate flooding and water runoff, they also are tiny little sponges that will, as the sun hits them over time, release water slowly into the garden, which is exactly why we can get away with never watering the garden. Last year, during a 90-day drought, I went on a 10-day vacation to Alaska and came back, and my garden or my farm was absolutely no worse for the wear. Conventional organic gardening would lead you to believe that adding compost to your soil is basically all you need to do to improve it, and I would both agree and vehemently disagree with that being the case. Basically, the biggest problem with the concept that adding compost is the only thing we have to do to improve our soil is that most people don't actually know how to compost correctly. They might be able to put stuff in a pile and have it break down, but where things tend to fall apart for most folks is not really understanding the science of what we actually need to put in our pile to make sure that we're actually getting the maximum yield from our composted stuff. I have a video that you can click on somewhere here or down in the description that breaks down composting, excuse the pun, in a way that a 5-year-old could understand the kind of complicated science of what will ultimately make beautiful, rich compost for our gardens. And this right here is going to be the gold that fixes our soil. Let's take it into the garden. There are lots of secrets to lazy gardening, but the most important one is that we never leave our soil uncovered. Leaving soil uncovered allows the sun to beat down on something that is black and dark and is going to absorb all that heat. That will cause all of the moisture that's in the soil to evaporate off the soil. It will turn into dust, and all of our fertile soil will blow away in the wind. Look up the Dust Bowl if you don't believe me. So as lazy gardeners, when we're doing our spring garden prep, if we have a bed that does need to be amended with compost, we'll rake back all of this wood matter that's helped keeping the moisture in the soil. Basically, we're moving all the tiny sponges out of the way. Then we'll come back in here and dump our compost in. We don't need a ton. About 1 inch of compost a year is more than plenty. But of course, I'm obsessed with composting, so I make a whole lot more than that. Once we've amended the bed with compost, we're going to, you guessed it, bring last year's pathways into the garden bed to become mulch, and at the same time, we're making room for our cardboard layer that's about to go down on the ground. The idea behind putting mulch in the pathways, letting it break down for a year, and then ultimately raking it back up over the garden beds is that basically we don't want the mulch that's protecting the top of the soil in our garden beds to be so thick that little tiny baby seedlings can't actually move it out of the way. So letting that stuff break down over a season before we put it into our garden bed basically makes something that looks a little bit like this, which is fantastic for water retention, but isn't going to cause issues with our tiny little baby seedlings as they try to poke up through the soil. One of the first mistakes I see beginners making is not really understanding that roots desperately need to breathe. For a plant to truly thrive, there needs to be more going on below the surface than what you actually see above the surface. The idea behind plowing initially was that we were going to break up the soil and make really light, fluffy, airy stuff for the plant's roots to spread out in. And that worked really well for a few seasons, but then the fertility of the soil started to diminish significantly. And again, that led us to the Dust Bowl. As lazy gardeners, we don't till, we don't plow. It's extra effort that's truly unneeded and ultimately will mess with the fertility of the soil. So how do we get actually fluffy soil that provides enough breathing room for these really delicate roots? The answer will honestly probably surprise you, but it's mushrooms. If we look at the soil, we'll see a whole bunch of this white stuff that kind of looks like mold, but is in reality my secret to lazy gardening. This is mycelium. Mycelium is basically baby mushrooms. And that is an easy to describe, but not necessarily scientifically accurate way to talk about this stuff, but you'll get my drift in just a moment. Mycelium helps us to solve lots of problems that we have in the garden. Do you see how these little hairs are almost like little roots of their own? And basically what this mycelium is doing is it is eating this wood chip. The way mushrooms are actually made is by fungus eating the carbohydrates in wood chips and other organic material and basically breaking it down. But these little roots that you see here are actually creating tiny little pathways in the soil, which then helps break it up naturally. It creates little roads underneath the soil for all kinds of microbial activity and tiny little microscopic bugs to start moving around. And as all of those things happen simultaneously, we are getting soil that will then give these delicate roots plenty of space to expand, to go deeper where they can get more access to more nutrients and also find their own water instead of counting on us to water them from above. Mycelium will show up naturally if you're using decomposing organic material, but I always want to kickstart that process. And so I actually intentionally plant mushroom spawn. This is wine cap mushroom spawn, which ultimately will turn into wine cap mushrooms, which is, in addition to creating better soil for our plants, another protein source that we can grow right here in our garden with very little effort. So come over here. Right in here, you can actually see some wine caps starting to form right off the bat. This is a delicious and delightful edible mushroom that is jam-packed with protein and other nutrients that are really going to help us. And as you can see here, all around these wine caps that are growing is plenty of that good old white stuff, mycelium. This bag is basically a bag of sawdust and grain that has been infused with the spores of wine cap mushrooms. So as we are doing our spring garden prep, one of the things that we're also doing in addition to spreading all of that wood mulch around is adding some of this wine cap spawn into our garden for it to spread around and help decompose this top layer of mulch throughout the next gardening season as well. Oh, this is the cardinal sin right here. If you remember from earlier in the video, we never leave our soil uncovered. So what we're gonna do is really just grab a handful of wood chips from over here in the pathway and spread it right onto the garden. Oh, look at this. This is glorious. This is some probably oyster mycelium that I tossed out here a few months ago. And as you can see, it's already almost completely obliterated what used to be a handful of wood chips. I love it. That's the kind of stuff we want to see around here. So here I am raking up last year's kind of top coating of the garden, and I'm being really gentle with a soft rake because, as you can see, there's already stuff planted in here. These are onions and garlic that have overwintered, and once I've pulled that last year's top coating back, I'm adding in some wine cap spawn, top dressing it with compost. None of this needs to be too precious, and you may recognize a farmer's best friend. My $10 kiddie pool that I bought 4 years ago is still going strong. Does it hold water for my cranky pig Lucy anymore? Lucy, this is what happens to the pool getting all emptied and stuff. It sure does not. However, it makes a great compost screener now, and that's how we afford to do this stuff, my friends. We use what we've got to get where we need to go. There's nothing fancy. There's very little that's scientific. Probably the biggest difference between lazy gardening, aka permaculture, back to Eden gardening, you know, there's lots of different names for this style of stuff, that makes it different from traditional farming is that we are not monocroppers. We have multiple crops, multiple species of plants, all growing right up against and next to and around each other. So right here where we're looking right now, we've got a whole bunch of garlic, onions, we've got some mint coming up, we've got figs right here, we've got blueberries that we stole from the forest right here, and lurking beneath the surface is some rhubarb and some other really cool stuff. I mean, even this early in the season, you can see that this has strawberries and all kinds of other things growing in it right here. And that's by design. The more roots that are in the soil, the more air that's being made. The more things that die in the soil, the more natural organic compost we're having, constantly amending our soil. And the more species that we have in the soil are going to bring up different nutrients from the soil. But I grabbed a handful of what looks like grass to show you one of my favorite lazy gardening tips. I like to interplant garlic and onions with all of my other plants because they help with disease and pest resistance. Literally because they are stinky, I mean, they don't call it garlic breath for nothing, these will naturally repel a lot of like rodents, mice, voles, even cats at times. They're gonna confuse some of the bug predators, and also, have we mentioned how delicious garlic and onions make everything else? At the end of every season, I let my plants go to seed and spread their seeds all over the place. And then as those seeds start to grow, I have free seeds that I didn't have to plant. I didn't have to, baby in a greenhouse. And now I can literally take this handful of what looks like grass, shake off the dirt and everything, and I'm not super worried about being too precious about any of this stuff. I can literally just take a finger, stick it in some soil, and hope for the best. And I'll do this all over the place. And there goes my neighbor. It's always an adventure trying to film out here. Between the dogs, the road, the airport, the donkeys, the alpacas, the goat chaos, it's a miracle we get anything done around here. Which is why it's so important to do this stuff the laziest way possible, because there's not a whole lot of time for anything. By the way, because these things are so fragile, I am planting 2 per hole. And if I have to come back later and thin them, so be it. And this, by the way, is lazy gardening at its absolute finest. I have a beautiful concoction of lettuce seeds, chard, kale, kohlrabi, Chinese lettuce, cilantro, and spinach. And I'm basically sprinkling these about. I'll cover them with compost and I'll see what actually comes up. Seeds are cheap, especially if you collect them yourself. And this is one of the best ways to kind of guarantee some success, which is to sow or plant a whole bunch and hedge your bets a little bit. All of the things that I just tossed in the soil are what's known as cool or cold season crops. So they can grow even when temperatures aren't super ideal. Tennessee is known to have 12 springs. We are currently in what is called the Spring of Deception, which basically has a bunch of sunny days that make it feel really warm and make it really exciting to get outside and start planting stuff in the garden. But the best lazy gardeners don't plant their garden early. They actually plant it really late. So for once, procrastinating actually pays off. An especially wonderful exercise in futility would be planting tomatoes right now. Planting tomatoes a month early is not going to actually get you tomatoes a month earlier. In fact, it's going to create a little spindly plant that's going to struggle in the cold temperatures, and it will have a really hard time competing with the early spring weeds for ample sunlight, for nutrients in the soil. So having successfully sprinkled a few seeds into this newly composted bed, all I have to do to actually just like finish this thing off is cover it back up. Put it back to bed, if you will, and we'll come back in a couple weeks and see how it's doing. As I'm covering this up, I do want to point out that you can actually see a bunch of the seeds still like kind of on top of the soil. And one of the biggest mistakes early gardeners or beginner gardeners make is planting their seeds too deep. A lettuce seed this size only wants to be planted twice as deep as it is thick. And so that's as far as that wants to go down, which is a little counterintuitive. I think a lot of us want to put our seeds down deep. Other lovely neighborhood activities. Move to the country, they said. It'll be fun, they said. They were right. But there we go. We've put our little babies to bed. We'll come back in a couple months when it's time to plant the hot weather stuff. 12 years ago, when I planted my very first garden, I was trying to grow food because so much of our food at that time was coming from the food bank. And that's why food security is such a huge passion of mine. Teaching people how to grow their own food and how to do things themselves so that they're empowered to do it is what we're all about around here. And when I first started, I knew nothing about any of this. But I have cataloged the entire journey from total city slicker to full-time farmer on my Squarespace website, annofalltrades.com. Squarespace is a fantastic resource for someone like me who is not very tech savvy and spends most of her time outside with animals to very easily drag and drop anything and everything that I want to share with the world into a beautiful artist design template that then shares it with the world. Squarespace makes it super easy for me to host an online store where I sell merchandise, project plans, online courses, and I keep everyone updated about what's going on with the School of All Trades that I'm building right here on the farm. So if you have any big ideas that you want to share with the world, check out Squarespace. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/annofalltrades for a 10% discount. So as you're ready to grow forth and prosper, my friends, make sure that you don't make this any harder than it needs to be. Gardening is best done as lazily as possible. I will see you in the next video. Cheers!